Hi guys, welcome to the training this morning. It's going to be about differential reinforcement slash consequence strategies. Please let me know as we're going through this if you have any questions. So let's get right into it. So differential reinforcement training. We're going to teach ways to promote learning by living a healthy life is going to be the first part of the training. We're going to talk then about the types of consequences, and then we're going to talk about the different types of differential reinforcement. So let's get right into it. So the first thing we want to consider, and I know we mentioned consequence strategies, but these are a lot of antecedent strategies that we could think about when we're working with our VIPs. And one thing I'd like you to learn about is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. And BDNF is a protein that plays a critical role in the brain, particularly in neuronic survival, growth, and plasticity. So the repair and regrowth of your brain and your brain's ability to make new connections. BDNF aids in that. It's essential for learning, memory, and various brain functions. It increases brain plasticity. When your brain cells get damaged or face stressful situation, BDNF protects them and helps them come back stronger. So why are we learning about this? Well, it's an essential ingredient in our brain to help repair and during the learning process. So as we're teaching behaviors, as we're teaching someone new behaviors, we're trying to reduce problem behaviors. Having a high BDNF aids in this process. So it's important that we kind of build in some of these ideas into our treatment when we're working with our VIPs. So there's some ways to increase BDNF. And honestly, if you look at the list, a lot of them are just living a healthy lifestyle. So things that allow you to live a healthy lifestyle increase BDNF. And it kind of makes sense when we do some of these behaviors, when we engage in some of these behaviors or exposed to them, we feel better. If our brain feels better, usually we feel better. So some of these things to increase BDNF are exercise, enriched environments, sunlight, being social, hanging out with friends, deep sleep, meditation, a low carb diet, managing stress. So these are just some of the many ways that we could increase BDNF. And there's some food and drug supplements that I have listed here, like turmeric, dark chocolate, and fatty fish, or other ways that we could raise BDNF. So when we're thinking about working with our VIPs, one important consideration is to kind of notice maybe some of these areas that they're lacking in as far as exercise goes, or eating right, reducing a high carb diet, managing their stress, being social, maybe attending our social group, or reaching a deep sleep. You know, if our folks suffer from an issue like sleep apnea, well, they may never be reaching deep sleep, so they're gonna might not be learning as quickly as they would be if they had a CPAP machine or something to aid them to sleep with that problem. So just some things to consider and some things to build into your treatment plan as you're working with your VIP. And I don't put every single one of these ideas in my behavior support plan, but if I notice the VIP was in need of improving portion of their life by engaging in some of these behaviors, and of course, I'm going to review this with them, make sure it's okay, make sure it's individualized to kind of what their preferences are. I could build this into my treatment plan and build it into my day when working with them. So what are some ways that you guys working with your VIPs help to increase their BDNF?
Get them out into the community, out in the actual sunshine.
Yeah, get them,
Yeah,
love it. Get them out in the sunshine, get them out in the community.
Help
Very
them with
nice.
preparing for healthy meals
Okay, yeah, helping them with meal management, meal planning, preparing healthy meals could be a good way.
or dieting and exercise as well.
Dieting, exercise, yeah. And we don't have to do some crazy exercise. I'm going to think about my VIP's preference for exercise and I'm going to kind of implement those. I might offer some new ideas they never engaged in and see if that would be something that they would want to try. And I'm going to kind of individualize my treatment to kind of what they would enjoy. So great ideas, guys, about how to increase BDNF. And just realize when we're engaged in these behaviors, it makes the learning process that much easier. It makes those connections in the brain much easier to make. Anything else about BDNF, or do you have any questions about it? And there are other ways to raise BDNF. So feel free to look up and do your own research as well. So we want to think about, so that's kind of like the antecedents portion of the training, but we want to think about, now we're going to move on to reinforcement, and we're going to think about some ways to deliver effective reinforcement. So when we're working with our VIPs and we're developing our behavior support plan, these ideas fit nicely in the consequence section of our treatment strategies. So think about these different ways we could deliver effective reinforcement, and we're going to talk about each one. So the first thing, and remember, reinforcement is the stimuli that occurs during or immediately after the behavior. And what effect does reinforcement have on behavior? What's the definition of reinforcement?
It allows the behaviors to continue.
Yeah. So if a behavior is led to reinforcement, that behavior is likely to continue again in the future. So that's the definition of reinforcement. So if I have these qualities, if I could deliver reinforcement for skill acquisition in with these qualities, and also consider that these qualities are probably what's maintaining problem behaviors as well, I can manipulate the environment to help promote more appropriate behaviors. So the first thing to think about is effective reinforcement. The consequence is delivered immediately. So behaviors that we're engaged in right now, the consequences were delivered during or immediately after the behavior that we'd like to continue. Reinforcement that's future or delivered later is simply maintaining behaviors during that time when a new behavior is happening. So sometimes we go into a family's home and they might be like, hey, we're working on this problem behavior, and if they don't engage in this problem behavior at the end of the week, we're going to go to McDonald's. What's the problem with that if we think about immediate?
It's delayed reinforcement.
It is delayed reinforcement. So what behaviors might be, are we truly
Not
helping
effective,
that?
or
Go ahead.
I was gonna say it's not effective in the way that it's not as immediate, and the reward doesn't end up pairing with the behavior you want.
Yeah, we're reinforcing behaviors that maybe are occurring when we're going to McDonald's, right? So when the reinforcement's delivered. So think about reinforcement that's delivered immediately or during behavior is what's going to maintain behaviors into the future. Immediate. The more delayed the consequences, the less likely that it's going to have any impact on the behavior we'd like to see. So think about delivering reinforcement immediately. Distinct. Make sure that you have the person's attention when you are delivering reinforcement. And that's kind of common sense in my mind. We want to make sure we have the person's attention, that they realize that when we are delivering reinforcement, they are paying attention to it. So distinct. Descriptive. So we want to be descriptive in our positive praise statements. We don't want to just continue all day and say, good job, nice work, but describe the behavior that you are trying to reinforce. And I noticed a lot of you guys do this when you're working with your VIPs, which is a great strategy, and also a great strategy to teach staff you're working with, parents you're working with. When you're delivering that positive praise statement, make sure you describe the behavior that you'd like to see. And this is going to be super effective to reinforce appropriate behaviors. Preferred. So make sure you know what your VIP, make sure you know their preferences, because the preferences can be a reinforcing effect if you deliver it after behavior. So it doesn't necessarily mean it is going to be reinforcing, but it's likely to be reinforcing. So make sure you know what the VIP prefers, because not all types of attention are the same quality, right? There's different types of attention I could deliver for a VIP based on their preference. Can someone give me like an example of what I mean there?
What is interesting to one person may not be interesting to another.
Yeah. So what kind of quality, like I'm thinking about like some people like really that over the top attention, that kind of cheerleader to deliver that positive praise statement, and our VIPs might find that very preferred. But I know some other VIPs that don't want to be the center of attention like that. They don't want that crazy high level of attention and everyone looking at them. So it's important we kind of know the preferences of our VIPs so we could deliver reinforcement and consequences to the best of our ability. That we're not inadvertently punishing behavior by delivering attention that's not meet their preference, if that makes sense. So we want to kind of learn what our VIP finds reinforcing through their preferences. How might be a good way to kind of take the mystery out of what our VIPs may find reinforcing? What's a good data collection tool we could utilize in this area?
Preference assessment?
What was it?
A preference
We
assessment?
could use a preference assessment to find what they prefer. That's a good idea. It doesn't necessarily mean it will be reinforcing, but it's a good idea to do a preference assessment to figure out what they prefer. And there's a lot of structured preference assessments we could get into. Many times we just kind of are asking people kind of what they enjoy, what they like, getting that indirect information as well for preferences. What's another good data recording tool that might shed some light on what our VIPs find reinforcing?
ABC data collection sheet.
Yeah, ABC data. Why? How can that tell us?
If you
Because
look
of the consequences, you'll be able to evaluate what happens, after the behavior that they're, looking for.
Yeah. So if my VIPs engage in a problem behavior and I see similar consequences occurring again and again and again, well, I could say that those consequences are having a reinforcing effect on that behavior. And I've learned a great deal about the type of reinforcement that's maintaining the problem behavior. And now I could dish it out for skill acquisition behaviors that I'd like to promote. So use your ABC data collection, use preference assessments to your advantage here to find out kind of what's preferred. And of course, we don't know if something's reinforcing or not until when?
Until it happens.
Until what happens?
The behavior and the repetitive after effects, the consequences that you're recording
Yeah, so how do we see that very plainly?
in our data tracking.
Yeah, and your data tracking. So make sure you're putting your data on the graph and you can see the effects of reinforcement because what will the graph look like?
the behavior will increase or it will maintain.
Yes, the behavior will increase or maintain on your graph. So we know that, and if we're gathering ABC data, we know that consequence is having that reinforcing effect. Okay, any questions on that? And just remember, guys, just because someone prefers something doesn't mean it's reinforcing. And just because someone doesn't prefer something doesn't mean that it won't be reinforcing. Okay? The only way to demonstrate that reinforcement is to put it on the graph and to see what direction the data is moving in. Okay. Varied. So this is a big one as well, that we should deliver varied reinforcement. We shouldn't deliver the same reinforcement all day long. What kind of effect would that have on the person if we deliver the same reinforcement over and over and over throughout the day?
Satiating.
Yeah, it'll have a satiating effect. So essentially what's happening is the value of that reinforcement starts to lower. Every time they contact that reinforcement, it starts to get lower over time. And think about it. Think about it for food. At first, we go in for lunch, our lunch break, and we're very hungry at that time, and we're eating, and the food is very reinforcing. We continue to engage in those behaviors. But after 10 minutes of eating, what happens?
You
You're
get
full.
full.
Yep.
You're
And you want to move on
full.
to the next thing.
Yep, you're full. And now the value of that consequence is not as high, and you may stop eating because you are satiated with eating. And the value of that reinforcement is very low. So if you continue to, and if you continue to eat, what might happen?
You will explode.
Get a bellyache.
You will explode, which is not a good thing. So make sure, so we see that things that are reinforcing change throughout the day, depending on what is happening with that person. So, and think about our positive praise statements and how throughout the day, if we have a long day with one of our VIPs, how if we could deliver the same positive praise statement throughout the day, that it's actually losing its value. It's losing its value over time. So a good idea to do is make sure that you are delivering varied positive praise statements, that you're not just delivering the same good job throughout the whole day. Because just like food, if we contact that reinforcer too much too soon, it's going to have that satiation effect, and it's actually going to start to turn into an aversive, which is not what we want when we're thinking about reinforcement. Does anyone have any other questions about varied?
Mike, real quick, I know I
Yeah.
was watching a video. I know Grace and I were watching a lecture this week, and it was saying how it like, and I think you might have touched on this already, but like for example, one of my clients listens to the same two songs on repeat all day long. And originally it doesn't, I guess they were trying to teach us that even listening to the same thing over and over and over again doesn't necessarily mean it's going to lose its value. Like it very well could. But I thought it was really interesting because automatically I'm like, oh, this person will be sick and tired of listening to this over and over again. But it's been going on for a year now and it just hasn't lost its value. And that's always kind of impressed me. I thought that was interesting.
Well, yeah. And it may be like a routine thing. It may be like
That too, yeah.
a preferred song or a preferred, but I would argue that and I could be wrong, but I would argue that if you try to use that song as reinforcement, that it wouldn't be as potent as
100%,
a
definitely.
different reinforcer that you may use, because they always have access to it.
Gotcha.
No, I totally agree.
Oh yeah, me too, man. Cool.
The last one's certain, that reinforcement is going to be delivered for every occurrence of a behavior we're trying to teach. That every time the person engages in a new behavior, that the consequence is going to be delivered. That we will deliver reinforcement, at least when we're initially starting to work on a new behavior. So we want to make sure we deliver reinforcement for every instance of that behavior. What kind of schedule of reinforcement would that be for extra credit?
Fixed ratio of 1 or continuous reinforcement.
Yeah, good job. The fixed ratio 1 or continuous reinforcement. We're going to deliver reinforcement for every instance of that behavior. And that's very effective to maintain behaviors when reinforcement's delivered for every instance of that behavior, especially when we're learning that behavior right off the bat. So make sure that you are delivering that reinforcement for every instance of behavior. And thinking about all these, I really like the what the car companies do. And I know a lot of you guys heard me this spiel before if you attended this training. But in the 90s, people rarely wore their seatbelt in the car. People rarely, like, you got in the car, like a lot of parents didn't require that. A lot of people, it was like a party in the back seat with all the kids, right? No one wore their seatbelt back then. Well, car companies, and think about it. If you got pulled over, maybe you'd get a ticket. So that's not certain. You will. Maybe you'll get into an accident and get super hurt. Well, that's not certain either. That probably wouldn't happen most times you go out in the car. It might happen once in a great while. So these consequences aren't certain. They're maybe will happen, maybe not. And the odds of them happening are very low. So people rarely wore their seatbelt. So what did car companies do to using these effective reinforcement ideas? How did they teach people to kind of put on their seatbelt every time they sit in the car?
Start
a beeping, annoying sound. My old car, it would beep like 4 times and then it would stop for like 5 minutes before it would beep again. My new car will beep nonstop unless the seatbelt's on. So, yes.
So what is that training you to do? As soon as you get in the car, you're putting on your seatbelt. And guys, I'm going to argue
Yeah.
with you that reinforcement's such an automatic process. Like I get in the car and I put on my seatbelt. I'm not even thinking about anything. I just kind of automatically do that, right? So that's another thing to think about with reinforcement. It's such an automatic process. How many of us, we lived at maybe the same location for a long while now. How many people get in the car to drive home and you're like daydreaming and you get home fine and you're pulling in the driveway and you don't even really remember how you got home, right? And you're like, wow, I can't like engage in tons of behaviors with driving. It's, super serious behaviors I was engaged in, but I handled it totally fine with minimal effort on my brain, paying attention and those kind of things. So really think about how reinforcement's an automatic process of our brain that as we learn behaviors, the less effort we need to kind of engage in to kind of do the behaviors moving forward. So behaviors that have been reinforced throughout our lives, we barely even think about it when we're doing it. They kind of just automatically happen. But yes, they put the beep in the car and now everyone is wearing their seatbelts. And I argue that they don't even need the intervention many times. You get in your car and you put on your seatbelt way before you pull out of your driveway and start hearing that beeping. So effective strategy using these effective reinforcement ideas to have people wear their seatbelt in the car, which is a worthwhile a usage of ABA, I would say. The other example Aubrey Daniels teaches us he taught us about 2 factories. And in one factory, they work with very acidic materials that if it fell on your hand, it would burn your skin immediately and leave like a very painful welt. And in the other factory, they work with like asbestos. So in the factory with the acid, we see workers wearing their safety equipment all the time. We rarely see a worker in that factory not wearing their safety equipment because the consequences are delivered so immediately and so certainly that everyone wants to protect their skin from this. And they need very few ABA interventions from their managers and their safety guy and those kind of ideas. So in that factory, everyone's wearing their safety equipment very nicely. But if we look at the asbestos factory, and we know with asbestos, it's a long future consequence that they need a lot of ABA strategies like signs, encouragement, and positive reinforcement to wear their safety equipment, that they're a lot less likely to wear their safety equipment due to the future of that consequence being delivered way off into the future, that it's very ineffective to change or maintain behaviors. So just another example of kind of thinking about how effective reinforcement really, if we understand these 6 points, it really could aid us in our work. And a lot of times, guys, when we're looking at problem behaviors, think about these 6 ideas about how that these problem behaviors are being maintained through these 6 ideas of effective reinforcement. And maybe not all 6, but a combination of them. And that it kind of could allow you to manipulate these events to help break that behavior reinforcement contingency for problem behaviors. Does anyone have any questions or anything to add, or another example?
We actually just read a discussion article in school specifically about everything you were talking about, so I can download it and send it in the chat if
I would love that. I would love to
Nice.
learn more about it. I think it's a super important part of our work. And whenever I'm working on a treatment plan with someone or thinking about consequences, these are the 6 things I'm thinking about. Yeah, we'd appreciate seeing that article. Thank you. Anything else? Okay, we're going to move on to the last part of the training, which is the types of consequences. So we have reinforcement, and we talked a lot about this. And what does reinforcement mean again?
What will be used to increase the behavior or maintain it.
Yeah, so it's just an effect It's a stimuli that occurs during or immediately after behavior that causes that behavior to occur again in the future when similar antecedent conditions are in place. So that is what reinforcement means. It doesn't mean anything else. And it's really we have to be really careful throwing this word around, especially with non-ABA practitioners, because everyone kind of has their own thought about what reinforcement means. A lot of times people will say it's something good, it's something nice, but that's not what reinforcement means. It's just an effect that will cause that behavior to happen again in the future. So it's super important that we understand this. And when we think about and thinking about the technological dimension of ABA, we really want to be careful throwing these terms around with stakeholders who may not be familiar with ABA terms or attend trainings like this about ABA, and instead use other words like this is going to strengthen the behavior or something like that to kind of stay away from using these words that may have multiple meanings or or the person might have a poor understanding of what reinforcement is. Extinction. So extinction is, what is extinction? And another example of a word we should stay away from with working with stakeholders.
Stopping reinforcement that previously maintained a behavior, non-wanted
Yeah.
behavior.
So we're going to just withhold reinforcement for a previously reinforced behavior. We're just going to withhold it. There's poor effects that extinction has on behavior. Behavior is likely to get worse in several different areas before when we use extinction strategies. And I encourage you guys to talk about it to a BCBA and try to steer clear of extinction strategies. And I know it's kind of a common ABA practice to use extinction strategies, but steer clear of it for people that may have challenging, aggressive, self-injurious behaviors, because behavior is likely to get worse before it gets better. So, and a lot of times other ABA practitioners, and especially working with adults, came in and worked with our BIP in the past and thought about using extinction strategy, and the behaviors got a little bit worse. And the person who was working with this, like family member, staff, were unable to handle the effects of extinction, and will likely provide reinforcement, actually shaping the behavior to be worse over time. So extinction strategies is a great strategy, something to think about when we're working with our BIPs, but just be careful that we don't cause more problems in a house when we go in by just throwing around this extinction idea that we're going to withhold reinforcement for a previously reinforced behavior. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on the last slide. And then finally, punishment. And I don't mean anything bad by punishment. I don't mean like we're delivering an adversive, even though that could be an example of a punishment effect. What is the definition of punishment?
Just something that decreases behavior.
Yeah, the opposite of reinforcement, that whatever is being delivered is actually causing the behavior to reduce over time. So just some things to think about in the consequence section of your ABC data recording. So we're going to talk about differential reinforcement now, guys. And differential reinforcement is kind of like we're going to deliver reinforcement differently depending on what's going on. So we're going to talk about some of the differential reinforcement strategies that we would think about when we're working with our VIPs. So it's a consequence strategy. We're going to essentially reinforce appropriate replacement behaviors while minimizing reinforcement for challenging behaviors. And we're going to consider the matching law, which was the last slide we'll get to. So types of differential reinforcement. Well, we're going to get into each one of these. The first one's differential reinforcement of other behaviors. The other way we say this is the DRO. The DRO, other behaviors. So here we're going to reinforcement is delivered for the absence of problem behaviors for a specific time period. We're going to reset the time interval if problem behaviors occur. And we're going to combine with other differential reinforcement procedures. And this is kind of like where differential reinforcement in our science, it didn't even start in our ABA world, but we kind of adopted it. But this is kind of the first idea of an ABA strategy using differential reinforcement that was developed. And it just got better from here. It just got better from this one. It's kind of I don't want to say anything. I don't want to discourage you from using it because it could be an effective strategy, but not the best differential reinforcement strategy. But kind of the other ones evolved from here. So, so they used to use this in like penal colonies or prison systems, where that's where it got its origin. And it was like, hey, don't join a gang, and we're going to get some money at the commissary. Hey, don't get into a fight, and you're going to be able to make an extra phone call. Right. So they kind of use this other behavior idea to help suppress problem behaviors. When I started working in a group home for the first time, there was a DR, and I didn't know about any of this, but there was a DRO procedure implemented for one of the clients. And it was like, don't run away from the house and you will get $1 a day. So I didn't know at the time, and we did this intervention. It was a restricted procedure, and we give this person $1 a day for not eloping from the residence. And then they would save up their money and be able to go and purchase like an ultimate reinforcer in the future. What's the problem with the DRO in your mind? What problem jumps out at you?
It doesn't do replacement behavior.
Go ahead.
Sorry,
I was
Joe.
gonna say, is it not transferable also to a different setting?
No, it could be.
Okay.
It could be transferable to a different setting. Anyone else?
Is it that they can become dependent upon it? And
Well, it's a
kinda
possibility, but not what I was thinking about.
That's what behavior you are exactly reinforcing.
Yeah, we're not reinforcing an appropriate alternative behavior. We're just reinforcing the absence of problem behavior. So obviously, and we understand problem behavior better than most, we know that there's a need that the VIPs that's being met through the display of problem behaviors, that the person's not engaging in a problem behavior because they're bad or any of those terms that maybe people ascribe for poor behavior, that they're engaging in this behavior because it's the best way for them to accomplish this goal. So if we're just reinforcing the absence of problem behaviors, we're not teaching a necessary behavior that's more socially appropriate for our VIP to access that consequence. So differential reinforcement of other behaviors should be used in concert with the other differential strategies. We shouldn't just use this strategy in isolation, that this strategy is used with the other differential reinforcement behaviors, okay? Which we're going to talk about right now, because essentially we are reinforcing other behaviors. When reinforcement is finally delivered after our interval, we're going to be reinforcing behaviors that are occurring at the end of the interval, because that's when reinforcement's delivered. And we just learned about immediacy. We just learned about certain. So if we're delivering reinforcement at the end of the interval, we're reinforcing behaviors that are occurring at the end of that interval, which could be other problem behaviors that we didn't target in our plan. So that's why we need to make sure we use the other strategies we're going to talk about right now in concert with the DRO. The DRO is not good enough to use in isolation, which is a problem that the group home I worked at was engaging in with this VIP, with their treatment intervention, that they could have taken it a step further, and is what we should think about as well. We're going to think about differential reinforcement of incompatible behaviors, and this is the DRI. And I also like to think about this as differential reinforcement of impossible behaviors. Okay, and we're going to reinforce the desired behavior that makes the challenging behavior impossible to occur. We're going to select a behavior that's in the VIP skill repertoire, and that's what you guys will start to see now. We're going to select an alternative behavior, and the alternative behavior we want to teach has to be a behavior our VIPs can engage in. It shouldn't be a it could be a new behavior, but we have to make sure that our VIP has the skills to be able to do it. So an example here is picking skin. We have a VIP who's picking skin, and we're thinking about using the DRI. So we're gonna reinforce the use of a fidget spinner or other handheld items to help prevent the picking of the skin. What is another DRI example that maybe you guys did with your VIPs?
Mike, I have two examples actually. Like the one is with my one guy when he would go to the store, he would just try to buy as much as he could. And BCBA Ken suggested when he goes to the store, like, why don't you try to have him carry all this stuff? So, he was only able to carry so many items. And then my other example is with our buddy at program, when he'd be traversing through program to go to the bathroom, he'd be looking at things to grab. We were like, well, here, carry this tablet and your snack. And then, like, he can't grab it because his hands are full.
Yeah, great example. So occupying the hands is a lot of these strategies that we're going to occupy the hands. I worked with the kiddo in school, and he would when we were transitioning to different classrooms or the lunchroom, he would want to touch the other kids like back or their shirt or whatever. And I made this huge hall pass that he had to carry around when we went into the hallway, and I totally stopped that behavior from occurring. And so think about using the DRI as a way to help prevent problem behaviors. And we want to reinforce the use of using this alternative. So we're going to give it to them and then reinforce. And we've seen a lot of these, like put your hands in your pockets, right? Hold this item. Any other examples that you guys could think about for the DRI? Okay. So the DRI is just another, and we would want to use this strategy in concert with the DRO, like I said. We also have differential reinforcement of low or high rate behavior, and we're going to decrease or increase the overall frequency of behavior. And I'm not going to talk too much about this one, but pretty much we're going to identify that a behavior is occurring too often or a behavior is occurring not often enough. And we're going to withhold reinforcement until we see the predetermined level of behavior occur. So what could be a behavior that's occurring too often or maybe not often enough that we could think about for using this strategy for? And remember, these behaviors aren't like necessarily problem behaviors, but behaviors that could be occurring too often or not often enough.
Too often can it be a kid calling off in a school instead of raising his hand?
Okay. So the kid's calling out, wait, so the kid's calling out in class instead of raising their hand. I was thinking about maybe like a kid in school that's maybe asking to go to the bathroom too often. Right? They're asking to go to the bathroom like every 10 minutes. And if you worked in schools, you would know this is kind of a common behavior that we see. So what could be an idea if we see the client asking to use the bathroom 6 times in an hour? How might we use this idea to help lower the occurrence of that?
If he's using it for escape, we can try other things like asking for a break.
Sure.
Or breaking out the things that he has to do in a smaller parts, so it looks easier for him to do, so he doesn't get overwhelmed with the subject that he needs to do.
Sure, yeah, we could teach that alternative behavior, and we definitely should. We definitely should teach that alternative behavior. So we might say to this VIP, hey, if you just ask to go to the bathroom 5 times instead of 6, there you have 5 opportunities to use the bathroom. And once they're over, they're no longer available. And if the VIP meets that criteria, maybe they get an extra special treat. Maybe they get some type of reinforcement for meeting that criteria. And then we slowly lower it to normal rates. So it might be like you go to the bathroom once an hour or something, So that's one way we might be able to lower the occurrence of a behavior occurring too often. And finally, the DRA, and this is kind of what Diego is talking about, is teaching this alternative behavior. And this is our golden goose of treatment. This is what we always want to be thinking about when we're using differential reinforcement, is teaching this alternative behavior. Coming up with an alternative behavior that we could teach. So our same example, we noticed that the VIP is asking to use the bathroom all the time. We figured it is an escape maintain behavior. We could teach an alternative behavior, like Diego mentioned, teaching the person to ask for a break. So this alternative behavior is more socially appropriate, and then we could deliver a break for them asking to use the break. But there's some considerations to think about. We're going to heavily reinforce desired behavior. So as behaviors, the appropriate behavior is happening, we're using our antecedent strategies. We see the alternative behavior. We're going to heavily reinforce that desired behavior by thinking about all of the strategies of effective reinforcement that we talked about earlier. And we're going to minimize reinforcement or possibly eliminate reinforcement for the challenging behavior. So we're going to withhold or minimize reinforcement for the challenging behavior. But again, please be careful to not use extinction strategies without considering and talking to a BCBA first, because we could inadvertently make the problem worse momentarily. And if it's an aggressive behavior or self-injurious behavior, we don't want to accidentally cause harm by using an extinction strategy when another strategy might be better suited to help keep everyone safe. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Behaviors must lead to the same function or result as the challenging behavior. So, if we notice, that's why it's important we do a proper FBA, we figure out the function of behavior and develop that hypothesis. So we could then teach that alternative that leads to the same result as the challenging behavior. And I want you guys to really think about the quality of attention maintaining the problem behavior, because we want to deliver that same quality or better consequence for that alternative behavior. And we have to consider our VIP's skill repertoire, or what they're good at already, because we want to make sure the behavior is less effortful than the challenging behavior. So we don't want to teach a behavior that our VIP might not be able to engage in. So we want to consider what our VIP skills that are right now and teach an alternative that matches up with what their skills are. Because when we're teaching an alternative behavior, we want to try to make the behavior less effortful than the problem behavior. And we want to make sure we deliver heavy reinforcement for the alternative behavior as well. So we talked about a break. What's another example of an alternative behavior that we could teach?
Communication.
Okay, a communication. We could teach someone to communicate, to be able to maybe ask for a preferred item or activity, or communicate a way to get attention from us. So we could kind of, if we notice problem behaviors are occurring to kind of get attention, we could teach an alternative behavior to kind of help the VIP get attention a more socially appropriate way. So communication is a big one, and we want to be careful, because if we're thinking about the strengths of our VIP, we want to make sure we pick a communication modality that suits their skill level, whether it's vocal communication, sign language, PECs, or the augmented communication devices. So we're going to teach an alternative behavior, okay? Any questions on this? We're going to consider this matching law, and we're going to talk about matching law now. And this is kind of a great way to kind of consider teaching an alternative behavior, as well as how problem behaviors might be maintained. So matching law, and when I first learned about this, it was confusing for me. Matching law, there's relative response rates will match relative reinforcement rates. So let's see. So when someone spends more time watching TV rather than exercising, even if they know exercising is healthier, we would say that the reinforcement delivered from watching TV, and we have a really low effort behavior laying on the couch, and we are getting reinforcement by watching the TV. So we're more likely to engage in that behavior over exercising, which is probably a lot of effort. And think about the results of exercising. They're very future oriented. They don't happen immediately. So we know they're very ineffective to maintain behaviors. So matching law. So what I want you guys to think about is we have a problem behavior, and we're trying to teach an alternative behavior. And they're kind of two buttons. We have two buttons right in front of us. So one's the alternative behavior we're trying to teach, and one is the problem behavior that we came in to kind of help the client and their family with. What can we do to these buttons, to first thinking about the effort of the behavior? What could we do to these two buttons to make one easier to push and one more difficult?
Move one further away from them.
Yeah. So, and this is just an example of how to make a problem behavior maybe more effortful and the alternative behavior easier to engage in. So we put the alternative behavior right in front of them. We kind of promote that, the alternative behavior, and make it as least effortful as possible for the VIP. So when the VIP engages in pressing the alternative button, what could we do to the consequence to make it super spicy?
We can increase the amount, increase the size, make it more fun for that person.
Yeah, we're gonna front load, well, not front load. We're gonna deliver that reinforcement very heavy for that alternative behavior we're trying to teach. We're gonna make it more valuable than what the reinforcements being delivered for the problem behavior. And our brains are wired, guys, to engage in behavior that's least effortful, that results in more bang for our buck, that we're going to get more reinforcement for the least effortful behavior we're engaged in. So when we're teaching an alternative behavior, it's important that we set up the behavior to be less effortful than the problem behavior and also delivers a higher level of reinforcement than the problem behavior. Okay? And we can avoid the symptoms of extinction by using reinforcement for the problem behavior. So yes, I am saying that we could reinforce problem behavior, but we could reinforce it very minimally. We could deliver just a small amount of reinforcement for a problem behavior, and we could deliver a maximum amount of reinforcement for the alternative behavior we're trying to teach. And this will have profound effects on the person's brain that they would likely want to engage in the alternative behavior we're trying to teach because it leads to such a greater form of reinforcement than the problem behavior. And why would we do this? Well, we would consider this idea if the VIP's behaviors are dangerous, if they're self-injurious, aggressive, property destruction, and we know that the team cannot handle the symptoms of extinction, which could be an increase in aggression or other problem behaviors.
Thanks for stopping with me today.
Hi, sweetheart. Can I do a mango dream?
A mango dream? What size?
Chloe, I love that we just heard you order.
Bro, all the talk about Dunkin', you know? So guys, use matching law to your advantage. Heavily reinforce the alternative behavior we're trying to teach using those effective reinforcement skills and minimize reinforcement for the problem behavior. Talk to a BCB if you're considering using an extinction strategy and try to steer clear from it if the VIP is aggressive in nature or has serious problem behaviors that we would not want to evoke by using an extinction strategy. Does anyone have any questions about the training today or have anything to add that I may have missed?
I just wanted to add about the DRO.
Please.
Yeah, so now that we have the kit department, so DRO is also used in the schools. So teachers, they cannot reinforce every kid every time that they're not having behavior. So a way to do that is they use DRO. And the kid not have any problem behaviors to the entire classes when they're reinforcing. So like you said, DRO by himself it can be helpful, but it's also more useful when they is used with another one. Like if you have a kid actually having more behavior, you have to use more for that kid. But if in a settlement like that, there is a big group, but in the rest of the group that are not having behaviors, DRO, it can work. Like for instance, if we are at the program and they are doing an activity, and during the entire activity nobody's having any problem behaviors, they can use DRO. They don't have to reinforce every 1 minute during the activity if nobody's having behaviors.
That makes sense. I didn't think about it that way. Thank you for that. Anything else? Okay, guys, so think about effective reinforcement strategies in your work. Think about how they might be maintaining problem behaviors, and think about how we can teach alternative behaviors by the effects of effective reinforcement. Think about how living a healthy lifestyle can increase brain plasticity, making new behaviors easier to learn. So living a healthy lifestyle is going to play a pivotal part in helping teach our VIPs new skills. And then finally, think about the differential reinforcement ideas here, the strategies, the interventions, and think about matching law, and think about how we can use these strategies to help our VIPs live a better quality of life. If you have any questions for me, I'm always available. You can send me a message on Teams, and we can always talk about these ideas in supervision as well. So I really appreciate your attendance today. I hope you guys have a good rest of your week. Thank you very much.
You
Thank
too.
you. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Have a great day.